Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and Honourable Minister. We've heard already about how significant policy changes and how we fit agricultural research for development processes in these new changing worlds. One of the biggest features that's come through in the last 2 years is the dawning realization amongst those of us with the wrong chromosome that actually women are the center of agriculture. We heard earlier about some of the issues that are raised, the reality that women are half the agricultural population. They're often not even described as farmers, but they're doing the work. They're doing more than half of the work in many cases. So we have to rethink the whole way we're going at agricultural research for development as well. Put women's needs at the center of these processes. Put women in our institutions at the center of the institutions, not the periphery, as clearly is the case at the moment. And we're in a world where we talk of food security. We can talk about producing enough food, but we also have to look at who is getting the food and who is able to benefit from the food. So the access is particularly where women have such a central role in the family nutrition. And this morning, we have the privilege of a number of very well-known figures in this field of gender in agriculture. And this is something that we're running through the whole conference. Women are at the center of these processes in all of your thinking, in all of your discussions. So I'd like to welcome our moderator for this morning, Dr. Uma Lele. Uma you'll be very familiar with from the last GCARD, who was the architect, the prime architect of the global report for the GCARD 2010, and indeed laid the foundations for the roadmap that we've heard all about this morning. Uma spent a long career in the World Bank in particular, in their evaluation unit, and since her so-called retirement from the World Bank, seems to be busier than ever and is constantly on the move, involved in water, forestry, and indeed agricultural research for development. So Uma, I'd like to welcome you to the stage. Just to be gender balanced, I'd also like to welcome a man for the team, Prabhu Pingali. Prabhu has worked in CIMMYT, in FAO, and of course now leads the investment area, including agriculture research for development, in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Prabhu, welcome. Now, the CRPs are also engaging with policy, with institutions, with the changes required. And there is one program that is cross-cutting across those, led now by Karen Brooks, who's recently joined as leader of the CRP for Institutions and Innovation. I've probably got the wrong title, but you know what I mean. Thank you. Karen worked in the World Bank Africa Department before coming to be based in IFPRI to lead the program, wherever. Yeah. Switching to the other side of the world, we have Lourdes Adriano from the Asian Development Bank. Lourdes was very involved in the global conference on women in agriculture held back in March that you heard reference to. And that's a real game changer that we're putting women right at the fore in how we think about agriculture. Lourdes. And finally, Carla Hora from Brazil, from the Ministry of Agrarian Development. She's in charge of the gender issues there. Have we got Carla here? Oh, Carla, sorry, welcome. Who have I missed? Finally, except for Bridget Moassa, who I'm delighted we have here. Bridget is an award fellow. Now, that is, you know, I hope, about the award training scheme in Africa, Africa Women in Agriculture Research for Development. And this is about bringing on the brightest and best young scientists from Africa, women scientists, giving them careers, giving them mentoring, giving them the future that they will need to be. So, Bridget, we're delighted to have you here. Bridget is training in Brazil at the moment, and is here to speak for the voice of youth as we have brought into this conference. So thank you. With that, Madam Moderator, I'll hand to you.
It's a great honor for me to be here. I'm a little intimidated by the size of this room. And I wanted to say two things. One is that the men have taken so much time that they have asked me to reduce the amount of time that we have. But we are, as women, we are used to accommodating to all sorts of pressures from men, so I'm going to try and accommodate. The second is they changed the format, so I'm sitting on a very unstable stool. So please don't be surprised if I fall off. And not being as tall as Carlos, I have a great disadvantage because I can't reach the floor, and that makes me very insecure. So if you find an insecure Umalele asking questions, please forgive me. So with that introduction, I'm just first quickly going to give you some background on this, the genesis of the gender conference. You know, the Delhi conference was very exciting to me as somebody who comes from a developing country but has worked in the World Bank and international organizations for many years, because we talk a lot about demand-driven work. And this was an excellent example of APARI making demands on GFAR to say we want to organize a conference on gender issues. And I was particularly glad as an Indian woman to see the initiative coming jointly from ICAR and APARI. So 750 participants, it was really quite an exciting conference. I met several people who were at that conference. And it was a result of this obviously changed the, I don't know whether I can go back to, oops. It was a result of a lot of initiatives that had been taking place in international organizations. FAO had done a report, and you've heard about the fact that 20 to 30% increase or gap in yields is because women don't have access to technology. 100 to 150 million people can be brought out of poverty if there is more attention to women. The World Bank had done a very major report on gender. There were a variety of activities going on through GFAR, through international organizations. So in a way, the conference in New Delhi was a way of culminating a lot of these efforts to see what can we do in a more organized way to have an initiative on women. Obviously the PowerPoint presentation has become screwed up. So I'm just going to start with the panel and not give you more background, because several others have commented on the New Delhi conference. And there are a number of recommendations that came out of the New Delhi conference. Since I can't find them on the PowerPoint, and technology is not helping us. The recommendations were, first and foremost, make women in agriculture more visible. And that was a very important recommendation because of a feeling that although there is a lot of talk about gender, we don't have gender disaggregated data, we don't have discussion of policies which address issues which are specifically affect gender. Therefore, the second recommendation was strengthen evidence and knowledge base on women, because when FAO was doing its report, it found that a lot of the data that we should have on gender-related issues just doesn't exist. The third recommendation was to promote collective action and leadership, and I think it's one of the issues that we are going to explore in this session. What does collective action mean going forward? What are the kinds of things that are already underway through many networks that are functioning, and what could we do more? The fourth one, which was interesting, was to say establish rights for women at large. And I emphasize that because a lot of the work that has been going on gender issues says it's not just agricultural research that affects women. It's women's rights in a variety of areas, including lack of access to education, lack of land rights for women who make it difficult for them to have access to credit, etc. Whole lot of issues where women's rights need to be enhanced. And the final recommendation was that there should be a strong emphasis on building women's assets, capital assets as well as resources, including knowledge, and we heard a great deal in the earlier sessions on the importance of building women's assets. So now I'm going to start by asking our panelists, and I'm very grateful that obviously I can't make this move as much as I would like. I'd like to ask the panelists questions about what is it that they are doing in their own organizations or individuals in their individual capacity to enhance the role of women. And I will start with Lourdes because she was at the New Delhi meeting and she was a great champion, a very articulate spokeswoman, I should say, I'm sorry. You can see the terminology is going to have to change as women become more important. So Lourdes, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Uma, for the very interesting introduction. I'm from the Asian Development Bank, or ADB in short, and in ADB we've put gender equity and development in fact as one of the center stages of drivers of change. And these are shown in various ways. First, in our strategy 2020, gender equity and development are really part and parcel of the drivers of change for reducing poverty, ensuring inclusive and sustainable growth. Then we also have gender policy and gender action plan. The gender action plan is very specific, monitorable indicators, of which as of 2012, this year, we've actually surpassed our targets. Then we do country strategy programs. At the country level, we have gender action plans. And we make sure that each of the different projects have actually gender mainstreaming in them. And I'm happy to note that most of our agriculture, in fact, 99% of our agriculture projects have gender mainstreaming. But I'm not going to go to the litany of what we do in ADB, except that I'd like to refer you to one of our brochures, which really gives you a good overview of what we do in gender equity and development. I have several copies of this. The only problem is that it's in transit with my luggage, and hopefully it's coming today. And if it does, you will be one of the lucky 50 who will have them. At any rate, what's the key message of our success in ADB? The key message is that we have champions, and the champions are at the top. The management and the board themselves are really the champions, which brings me to the takeaway of the Delhi conference. And in fact, Uma mentioned to us the 5 priority areas. And I'd like to suggest that there could be several other networks. I know that there were more than 700 of us in that conference, but I'd like to suggest several other networks that could be strategic to influence. And the best way to influence them is to ensure the visibility of gender in different issues and statuses. Not just looking at that from a global perspective, but really in the context of the nuances of different status of gender in the different continents, such as in Asia, for example, which in 2050 is said to be, will have about half of the global output. But a large portion of getting there is going to be extremely difficult for agriculture and food chain in particular, and that have implications to gender. Now, if we get sex disaggregated data, the networks that we can influence are, one, the private sector. And I've seen the private sector being heavily involved now in the food chain, but also, interestingly, coming up with their own indicators. Like, for example, Syngenta came up with its Rice Bowl Index, and DuPont came up with its Food Security Index. The uniqueness about these indices is that they're not sex disaggregated data. And I think that's a critical area where we can contribute. There are others, such as well in the G20, which we've heard a while ago. One is the agriculture market information system. And again, here, that's not disaggregated. And the one that's closest to my heart is the Multilateral Development Banks, which is also an offshoot of the work in the G20, where we came up with what we call an action plan for food and water security. And again, if we can put gender disaggregated data to actually look at specific issues at different levels, that will make a significant impact, and we will easily get partners such as the private sector and the multilateral and bilateral banks.
Thank you very much. I think you raised some important questions. I was going to say, I heard earlier that agricultural research and development became part of G8 and G20 conversations because of the work that GFAR and many of the bilateral donors and members made. I was told by the women members of the group that I'm a part of GFAR, that they played a role in making sure that gender was included in it. And that is an example where they tried to make women more visible. And I think if we can do much more of this, not just at G8 and G20, if men begin to make women more visible in many of these international efforts, that would be very useful. And I think that is what you were referring to. Karen, would you, as a head of the policy and markets program, you moved to IFPRI, could you tell us what you are doing or you propose to do in the area of your CRP on gender issues?
Thank you, Uma, and thank you for the opportunity to join this discussion. Is my microphone working? Okay, I think it's on now. I'm Karen Brooks. I am the very newly appointed director of the Consortium Research Program on Policies, Institutions, and Markets. I joined the CG system and IFPRI in August, and I have spent much of my time since then learning about the CG system and its reform process and learning about the CRPs and how they function. And one of the first things that I've learned is that gender is really very important in the reform process and in the understanding of how gender can be addressed structurally within the reforms. Now, we've heard from our chair of the consortium board this morning how that is actually unfolding, that each of the consortium research programs, all 15 of them, have a gender strategy. They have gender teams working on those strategies, and then to link the issues across the CRPs, we have a gender network with a gender focal coordinator, a focal point at the consortium level. So we do have a structure in place within the CRPs to take these issues very seriously, to elevate them within the research agenda. And we're doing that not only because we think it's important intellectually, but because with the increased focus on impact with the reform of the CG system, we recognize that addressing these gender issues becomes an instrument for achieving the 4 dimensions of impact of the CG system: the improved food security, the reduced rural poverty, the health and nutrition, and the sustainability of natural resource management. And so we're looking very much at gender issues, not only in the traditional way so that we can learn more about how gender features in development, but in a very practical and instrumental way to understand how we can use our knowledge about gender to achieve the impacts of the CG system at this stage. Now, I can't speak to the gender strategies of all of the other CRPs because I certainly don't know them in sufficient detail, and I would very quickly run into trouble there. But I would like to tell you just a few things about how we're approaching these issues within the program on policies, institutions, and markets. Certainly, if you look at our main themes, gender is very relevant to all of them, but we've taken the view that we can learn some particular messages that would be very applicable in a number of sub-themes within our program. And the ones that we're focusing on now are the work that relates to social protection and safety net issues. Certainly, the issues of sustainable intensification and adoption of technology, the gender dimensions that either promote or impede the adoption of technology, looking at the design of agricultural technology systems and how they can be more responsive to the needs of women, And then, very importantly, on the participation of women in the enhanced value chains. We're doing a lot of work across the regions in understanding how value chains work, how they can be decomposed to look at their structural parts, and then to see how women can participate more effectively in improved value chains. Now, those are areas where we think enhanced gender work can be actually very helpful in understanding how we can create knowledge that will help our implementation partners move forward in those programs. But in addition to creating some new perspectives on these issues, we also feel that we have a very important role in developing the tools that our colleagues across the CG system and within the development community can use. And so I think if we look at those questions, how can our group be contributing to the recommendations? It would be in enhancing the rigor of the analytical work on gender issues, in improving the set of tools. And there we're particularly looking at the standard data sets at the household level. How can we improve those so that we can do better gender analysis? What particular variables do we need to have with sex disaggregation, and which ones do we not? And then we're also, very interestingly, looking at the agricultural censuses, which the national statistical services take forward on a regular basis. Would it be useful, possible, to standardize better treatment of gender issues within the censuses so that we don't have to do special surveys in order to get the information, but in fact we could draw on an enhanced regular collection of data that would be useful. So those are a few things. We also have the tool, which I think many of you are aware of, which was developed at IFPRI, but which we are using and taking forward through the CRP. And that's the Women's Empowerment Index. I think a number of you probably know that. You've probably worked with it, so I probably don't need to say too much more about it. However, we are encouraging its general application to help us harvest understanding about how gender features in development and which kinds of programs work best. So let me stop there, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Prabhu, first of all, I want to congratulate you because you are courageous enough to be the only man on the panel with women in majority for a change. And actually, as the Deputy Director of the Gates Foundation, you've been supporting a lot of work in the CGIAR, including on data, I know in FAO, and you're supporting the award program, etc. So it would be nice if you told us what you're doing from the Gates Foundation with specific focus on making women more visible. Thank you.
Thank you, Uma. It's great to be here. Also, it's great to contribute to diversity from my side on this panel. Many of you know the Gates Foundation's entry into agriculture is quite recent. We've been funding agriculture development activities only for the past 5 years. And from the very beginning, when we started to work on agriculture, it became quite clear to us that if we were going to have long-term impact on hunger and poverty, we need to focus our efforts on smallholder agriculture and improving smallholder agriculture productivity. Now, once we made that choice, then it was quite obvious that we need to focus on women, because the majority of smallholder agriculture in the developing world, particularly when you look at sub-Saharan Africa, is done by women. And if we don't address the needs of women farmers, then we are not able to meet the goals of increasing overall productivity. The State of Food and Agriculture report of FAO on gender was quite articulate in showing that by addressing the constraints that women farmers have to access to assets, to access to inputs, knowledge, etc., by addressing those concerns, you can actually reduce the productivity gap by about 30%. So that's an enormous improvement in productivity. And that's something that the foundation has been particularly struck by. And so we've focused our efforts to see how you can target women, how you can make women at the center of our grant-making efforts, and to promote overall growth from there. So when we do grant making, across all of our grants, everything from improving photosynthetic efficiency to extension programs, across all of our grants programs, we take a fairly strong gender lens and look at our grants relative to the impact they have on women farmers. And we ask fairly simple questions of our grantees. We ask them to tell us, as they look at the grants, as they design the grants, to show us how they know the women farmers that they're addressing, how they design their programs, keeping those women farmers and their needs in account, and how they hold themselves accountable to the women farmers in the products that they develop and in the way they conduct their research, etc. So this way, we're able to take the grant proposals that come to us and really work with them to make them much more focused towards the needs of women farmers. And that's something you'll find that all program officers in the foundation take very seriously. And also our co-chairs, Bill and Melinda Gates, take very seriously. So what we've been doing quite often is to be very responsive to the needs of women. But we're going a step beyond that. We're also trying to build a program that we call Gender Transformative. We'd like to create transformative change for women in agriculture across the developing world. And let me give you some examples of how we are trying to do that. If you think about one of the big constraints women farmers have, that's access to assets. If you think about India, access to land for women is a major problem. So what we've done is we've been working with Landesa that works with state governments in India to promote ways in which women get title to land, either separately, individually, or along with their spouse, along with their husbands. And that way, with titles to land, these women farmers have better access to inputs, better access to credit, etc. In Africa, we've been working with CARE to look at ways in which you can help women organize themselves into cooperatives, into groups for better access to inputs, better access to knowledge, technology, etc. And by forming these groups, they become much more powerful in being able to bargain and get better access to various services that are provided that have eluded them in the past. One of our favorite grants, one of the ones that we really like, is the award program, the African Women in Agriculture and Rural Development Program. And I'm delighted to see one of the award grantees, one of the award fellows, Brigitte, is here, and she's going to speak in a few minutes. It's a program that we believe transcends a real serious area of capacity building for women and women scientists, and linking women scientists to problems of agriculture and rural development in the region. Vicky Wild is here, and I'm sure you'll be hearing from her also in the future. So, we're really excited about the potential for creating transformative change. We're just about to announce, or we may have just announced, I haven't checked, a global challenge program that's targeted towards innovations for labor-saving technologies for women, especially as we talk about the feminization of agriculture, the high opportunity cost of labor, the movement of labor out of agriculture, the need for women to be able to manage the high labor-intense activities in agriculture. This is an area that's ripe for innovation that needs to take place, and the foundation is organizing a grand challenge program here. Uma, let me just comment on
one final thing, then
Final
I'll come back to you because I have some important questions to ask you.
On the gap,
Yes.
gap study. I think that's a great activity, and the foundation has been really delighted with the results that have come out of it. Let me say, we totally endorse the idea of keeping the pressure on governments, on civil society, etc., to keep focus on women. And second, we totally endorse the idea of collective action, and that's something I'll come back to. And third, we totally endorse the idea of reducing the gap in access to assets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, we all greatly appreciate what the Gates Foundation is doing, not just in the area of gender, but a variety of other things which eventually have an impact on women. And I think the point you made about drudgery is very important. How many times it came up in the New Delhi conference. And I think it raises some really very complex economic questions. And it's something major agenda for you on policy issues, because in some ways, because labor is so cheap and there is a desire to create more employment, there is a tendency to use labor-intensive methods of doing things. I find India, for instance, uses a lot more labor-intensive methods than is the case in China. And then there is a question of what part of it is drudgery, how does it affect productivity of labor, and the tremendous amount of time that women spend in fetching water, fetching firewood, carrying their children on their backs while they're working on the farms. And I really think that economists haven't fully given attention to this question of the trade-offs between creating more employment through drudgery kind of work, as distinct from the innovations that are needed to make women more productive, so more time is released for them to do things. So I applaud this new initiative. Now, I'll first probably go to Bridget Mausa, who is an award fellow. And since Prabhu mentioned award, I thought it would be a good idea for us to hear from her. She's also a veterinarian, and she's working with Ambrapa. So in her, we have many things going at the same time. There is South-South collaboration. There is a woman who is active professionally, and she is a beneficiary of the award fellowship, which is extremely competitive. So it would be nice if you told us what you're doing as a woman professional that makes a difference to the work in the area of veterinary sciences more generally. What are you learning from the South-South collaboration with Ambrapa? And in particular, what is it that you have done as a fellow of award from which we can learn something? Because I'm going to bring some pressure on Prabhu to extend that program to larger number of women, larger number of countries, etc. So this is an advertisement for award. We want to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Uma. And thank you, Prabhu and Bill and Melinda, for supporting this program. So just to give you a little bit of context on what I do, I work for the Department of Veterinary Services in Kenya, where I'm a veterinarian. And I mostly work with dairy farmers, beef farmers, but majority of the people that I get to work with are dairy smallholder farmers and poultry farmers. And this group predominantly has women who work in this sector. And what I've realized in the last few years that I've been working there is these women prefer to get information from other women. It's not like they will not get information from men, but they're more comfortable, they will open up, and they're able to get more information and transform it to knowledge when they get it from other women. So this was quite astonishing, because when you look at the Department of Veterinary Services as an example, there are very few women. If I go back to my experiences in veterinary school, we were only about 20 women in a class of 106. And not even all those 20 women made it at the end of 5 years. And when you go to the next level, to graduate school, only about 4 made it there. So if we are talking about transferring information to farmers and who are smallholder farmers and who assimilate information more readily from other women farmers, then it's very critical that we empower the women so that they can be able to pass on this information. And this is one of the ways that award has been very critical in doing this. As an award fellow, I first got my fellowship in 2010, and in the last 2 years that I have been an award fellow, I can attest to critical differences. One of the things is that award will do for you is provide a mentorship program. In my 5 years in veterinary school, I only had about 5 female lecturers that I could relate to, that I would mentor to, and it wasn't easy with the numbers that we had in veterinary school to get any real kind of mentorship. So that was lacking in the agricultural field. So award comes in and offers a program that gives you a mentor, someone who can walk with you through the agricultural sector and challenges you face as a woman researcher and how to relate to farmers. And that was very critical in sort of setting the stage for improving African women in research. Another key point was the leadership program. Because of our African culture, which is very great, but sometimes the women are not as confident as their male counterparts, and this comes out in research that we don't go out for the big research grants, we don't compete very effectively. One of the great programs that Award has is the leadership program that teaches us to sort of tap into the power within, to be able to go for these great programs, and this builds your capacity as an African woman researcher, which will eventually translate down to the African woman farmer and improve productivity. And this has been one of the excellent ways that Award has been able to do that. And to touch on what Uma asked on about South-to-South collaboration, again, Award offers like research placements for about 6 to 9 months for its fellows. And I was very happy to get a 7-month-long placement at Embrapa in Brazil. And I have a lot of Brazilian counterparts here. And it was very, very exciting because there are a lot of similarities as well as differences working in Embrapa, and there are a lot of things that I can relate to. I spent a lot of time talking to some of the researchers in even different fields that not very where I was working on, and to try and figure out what are some of the differences that, how was Brazil able to come from this particular situation into this one, and which is very critical. And I'm hopefully at the end of my research placement, I have 3 more months to go back, and I would like to take some of the lessons that I have learned and see how well I can implement them. But just to conclude, Award has been very critical in empowering African women, but what you realize is programs such as Award can only target very few women. It's a competitive program, and you have to apply for it, and it takes a lot of confidence in your abilities to even apply for the program. So there are a lot of women who are going to be left out on the roadside because very few slots, and we hope like programs such as Bill and Melinda can fund more women to be empowered, because so far we have about 250 fellows who've gone through the program, and it needs a lot more. It's a life-changing experience, but we also need to encourage more institutional programs. Back in the universities when women start to become researchers, to think about being in agricultural research, we need to incorporate such programs.
Thank you. I wish there was an award program when I was a PhD student at Cornell. I was the only woman in the department. And I know in many situations there are still very few women, and there isn't much mentoring. How we survived, we basically learned as we went along. And I think Award is an incredible program in mentoring women, young women. So you will hear from me about more support for Award-like program for other women. But now Carla Hora is the director of in the Ministry of Agrarian Development in Brazil. And she agreed to come at a very short notice. We were so glad to see that she could even make it to this panel, because there are a couple of other people who were supposed to be on the panel whose flights got canceled because of storms in London, in Washington, all over the place. So we are most grateful that you are here. And you said that you would like to talk about your experience in Mercosur countries, right, on issues related to gender and family agriculture. So thank you very much. Please.
Gracias, Una. Es un placer estar aquí. Yo voy a intentar hablar en español, que es malo, pero es mejor que mi inglés. Bueno, les doy un saludo a los participantes de la conferencia y igualmente doy a usted un saludo de parte del Ministro de Desarrollo Agrario del Brasil, señor Pepe Vargas, representando en este encuentro la presidencia pro tempore de la REAF. La REAF es la reunión especializada de la agricultura familiar del Mercosur. La REAF, desde su creación, tiene la cuestión de género como uno de sus puntos de trabajo e investigación. Los temas que son abordados tienen el carácter multisectorial que van desde el acceso y control de la tierra
and regarding land control and the means of production, all the way to mechanisms for support and institutionalization of gender policies within the government. But the features of the member countries of REAF are highly different. Despite the differences between the individual countries, some challenges are shared by all of our countries. First of all, to enhance the recognition of the productive work done by women and to create mechanisms to facilitate access to land by women. The second point is to create instruments in order to give support to production, allowing access to credit, technical assistance, and markets. Next, we wish to expand the availability of public policies with a gender approach. We would also like to have statistical data with a breakdown by gender regarding information on rural women in the countries. In order to deal with these topics, REAF, through the Gender Working Group, has prepared its regional program on gender equality, which is currently underway and receives financial contributions from AECID. The idea is to build actions with a gender perspective, but this requires policy, social, and economic changes, and the creation of wide-ranging mechanisms for women as far as decision-making is concerned. And within REAF, we have governments and also civil society organizations. And we wish to have a gender framework in agriculture and agricultural development in the countries. And this requires giving a leading role to rural women and their organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, because the time is very short, and I'm going to accommodate to the request made by of me that we should give more time so that we'll be less pressed in the remaining sessions. I'm just going to the final question. The group of women that GFAR put together after the New Delhi conference to say, how can we sustain this initiative? How can we make sure that the momentum that was built very strongly on women's issues continues with a more organized effort? Several of us have been on teleconferences 2 or 3 times since the New Delhi meeting. And it's from that, many of these women leaders in international organizations, in national systems, etc., it's very clear that, first of all, they're themselves doing a lot in their individual capacity. And I gave some examples of the fact that the G8, G20 paper had more mention of gender because somebody in an international organization, Lynn Brown, who couldn't be here, broke her arm, unfortunately, but she happened to be reading the draft paper and made a special effort to see to it that it had some mention of gender. We need much more of that kind of effort going on. I have a long list of things that I had made, but if the PowerPoint had worked, I would have shown those to you. That would be on the web. WFP, FAO, IFAD, and UN Women are working together. They've launched a program. They've had done a concept stage when we were discussing this, but they've already launched a program to work together. IFPRI is working actively with USAID, and the CGIR now has a platform of its own on gender issues. So in other words, there are a large number of these initiatives which are already underway. The most important question is, what can we do to sustain it? And so I think some of the ideas that have come up is that we need to build on these various initiatives of international organizations, national systems, etc. And so the question is, does the gender program, GAP, need a structure? Does it need an institutional home? Can it create a platform? And we heard earlier from Carlos that having a platform is necessary but not sufficient. It's very important that there be some people, as there seem to be the case in the CGIR, with a gender expert that is championing and making sure that all CRPs are enhancing their gender dimension and kind of becoming a conscience of the CGIR for the purposes of accountability, to make sure that gender issues are always in the limelight. And GFAR, as far as I know, currently doesn't have that kind of a internal capacity. Quite frankly, if I can put it that way, it's been, this entire effort has been completely seat of the pants effort. And it cannot sustain like that. I mean, many people have volunteered their time, their goodwill, but I think it is something that requires structure, it requires functions, it requires a steering committee that can guide this effort. And I hate to say this, but it requires some resources. So I'm going to, including a few people, champions that are responsible for making sure that the gender dimensions in all their aspects, not just agricultural research, because we've been talking about research for development, are championed, and that there are people that perhaps through GFAR can continue to do this, at least on a sustained basis. So I'm going to ask this question of the 5 panelists, to ask them what their views are. And I'm going to leave Prabhu as the last person, the person with the money, who can, I know, you're not going to answer it, but we want to hear from you about your views, about the need for structure. The reason why I also say this is that, if I can say so, national systems, national agricultural research systems are quite conservative, and they haven't given the gender dimension the attention that it deserves. Most of these national systems are headed by men, they are led by men, and women are not that visible. So that was the reason why I was very proud of the fact that ICAR and APARI started this initiative, and they really want to see it sustain, not just in India, not just in Asia, but at a global level. So please, we have, I think, I don't know how many minutes do we have before we all turn into pumpkins or go for lunch. We have 20 minutes to discuss this. So can you please give us your thoughts on anything, on structure, institutional home, platform, functions, money, network of networks?
Personally, that there should be a structure if you wish to sustain the GAP net as a network. But I think side by side with that, it needs to be buffeted by developing other networks as well. And the ones that I mentioned a while ago is the way to go. That means that if you want sustainability, or if you want sustainability of the GAP, we need to bring in equally important partners such as the private sector. Mm-hmm. And the way to do that with the private sector you bring in what they've already brought about. And that's, for example, in Syngenta, they came up with the rice bowl index. And the best way to do that is to bring in the sex disaggregated ramifications of this. And that brings in the financial and technical resources. I can only speak for the Asian Development Bank. And sustainability from ADB, we could do in various levels, and we're doing it at present. One is for the data generation. We're actually strengthening the data and providing disaggregated gender disaggregated information with the respective bureaus of agriculture and statistics in strategic areas in Southeast Asia. The second one is the influence that we have as brokers with different sub-regional cooperations. I can speak, for example, with the ASEAN, where again here, ASEAN is a very cloistered organization, but there are strategic areas in ASEAN where I think sustainability of GAP can be introduced. The entry point will be in the ASEAN Integrated Food Security Program, of which the most important will be in the area of the AFSIS, which is the ASEAN Food Information System. So here I'm using as entry points databases where you can provide the rigors for it. It provides both. It provides financial resources and technical expertise, of which a large number of people who are here can actually provide to ensure that sustainability. The other region, the others that I can speak of is the Greater Mekong sub-region. And here in the Greater Mekong sub-region, they've created working groups for agriculture. And they've actually come up with strengthening women and gender and development as part and parcel of the work in ensuring better economic, social corridors in the Greater Mekong sub-region. And the third one that I mentioned a while ago is our work on the multilateral development banks. I'm looking at financial mobilization. And in the multilateral development banks, we're providing work, technical work, together with EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction, Inter-American Development Bank, the Islamic Development Bank, the African Development Bank, the World Bank, and Asian Development Bank. The weakness of that plan is that we don't have gender disaggregated information on water and food security. And I think, again, that could be the entry point. And personally, what I could do is serve as the broker. That means serve as a broker for the organization that's incipient, that will carry through the work on the GAP, and bring in this group and introducing them to these various organizations and activities.
I knew that ADB is doing a lot of work in various areas, which is articulating issues of gender. And I think this is a very good example of how to link, if there was a network of networks, so that we are not reinventing the wheel, but we are trying to use the existing networks and existing efforts which are already underway, but build on them to make sure that the sum of the parts becomes much larger, the whole becomes much larger than the sum of the parts. So that, I think, suggestions you have made are very useful. Karen, I think you correctly pointed out that IFPRI has, and the CGIAR system as a whole, has tools to offer, ways to improve the rigor of the work that is being done, building on the existing data from the national statistical systems, etc. And in all of these areas, the national agricultural research systems need to play a very important role if we are going to leverage the CGIAR efforts to make sure that massive number of people benefit from it. So I'd like to hear from you as to how you think such a network of networks, which includes the National Agricultural Research Systems and also prods them to make sure that the gender issues become much more visible than they are at the moment in all aspects of their work. How could the CGIAR system and your own program, but not, as you said, not just your own program, from Carlos's comments, the system as a whole could be leveraged through a network of networks?
I think in that question, I have to fall back on the statement that I am really very new to the CG system, and I'm probably not the best one to respond to this. I think that in terms of the actual how and the suggestions about how the movable parts might be best linked up, we do have a gender focal point within the consortium who would be the most informed one to help us carry this forward. But I can say that based on my own understanding of the objectives of the CG system now, certainly the emphasis on partnership is very, very strong and very profoundly felt. And I think that a network of networks or an ability to link together the various partners who are working in this area would be very welcome, and I would presume that we would all want to participate and contribute to that. In addition, as we develop a new set of tools, we want to have very strong intellectual interaction with those who are also doing similar work, so that we are not duplicating, so that we are developing a complementary toolbox that will be helpful for all. And then in addition, as the CG system goes open with the data in this coming May, I believe is the date, and everyone is preparing for that, we will be doing an inventory of the data sets. We will be curating them, making sure that they are readily understood and usable for a wide variety of clients who might want to use them. Again, it would be very good to have a community of practice that is quite broad to move forward on that task as well. So I can see a number of reasons why we would want to participate and contribute to such an endeavor. But again, for the details of how it could be done, I think we should go to others than myself for that discussion.
Yes. Thank you very much. I think I'll probably turn to Carla now, because I think a lot of our focus so far has been on Africa and Asia, where there is the most acute problem of poverty, hunger, and undernutrition, lack of attention to women's issues, etc. Perhaps not so much in Latin America, but I think if there is to be a network of networks, then obviously the experience of Latin America is extremely crucial. And as a great fan of Ambrapa, I can tell you that there is a lot that we learn through cross-country experiences and cross-regional experiences. So it would be nice to know from you what you think of this idea.
Very well. I believe that a network should have a structure that enables dialogue and discussions with other forums. But I think that a network that discovers gender, the role and participation of women in agriculture, will have to include in its research and debate women and the social organizations as well as women's movements. They must be part of the discussions. So REAF has set itself the challenge of promoting a number of research projects and is setting about developing recommendations for women within Mercosur. Obviously, the approaches in the different governments are very different. But if you strengthen women's organizations and enhance dialogue and interaction between research and studies and the reality that women experience in the field, this will allow us to overcome very many challenges that we have identified. Now, how to go about it? We think we need to engage in dialogue. We need a research network. It is important that as we bring things into this network, the participants of women organizations should be included. They should debate and discuss with women because they are aware of all the problems regarding access to land, ownership, the difficulties, also when it comes to not only productive but also reproductive lives of women. So we have to gather the data, we have the willingness to do something more on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have women who are willing to work and to approach us as part of a dialogue to come up with even further recommendations and different policies that are more structural in nature. I think that would be my point.
Thank you very much for mentioning this idea of the women's groups. I remember in India, for instance, there is a distinguished organization called SEVA, which works on women's issues a lot. And I think one of the challenges for many of the national systems is how do they link the women's organizations that exist and are very active and all that to the research and extension work that they are doing. And I think a network of networks, if it is rather than just a research or ag research network, if that is what is the vision for this, then obviously one can link the women's organizations in the countries to the research organizations and extension efforts that are underway, etc. So thank you for reminding us of the importance of women's organizations. Bridget, if you would tell us, as a beneficiary of award, what are the more things that could happen if there are larger number of awardees, beneficiaries from who get the training in leadership, etc., of the kind that you have done, and also the fact that you have been able to do this on a South-South cooperation basis. So women have a lot to learn by also exchange of information. I think that is a survey that was done by GFAR, which I had in my PowerPoint, which I couldn't show you, but it showed that a resounding message from the respondents of the survey was not only make gender issues visible, but mainstream them, and also make sure that women have more opportunities for being trained, for exchange of information, for organized events where women can learn from each other's experiences through organizational participation, etc., etc. So I think it would be nice if you said a few words before we give the minority member of our panel the last word. Thank you.
Thank you, Uma. Maybe just before I start, I've been talking about award, and in as much as award has done a very good job of publicizing and many people know it, I think it's good to define what it is for the groups that don't know. So award stands for African Women in Agricultural Research and Development. So it's a capacity development program that seeks to mentor and empower African women scientists. So just to start on your questions, I think one of the greatest impact that award has had and can have to many other women is the empowerment and capacity building. And what this does is it gives the women visibility. Like having opportunities to go for science training or further research placement in several centers around the world to improve your scientific ability generally makes us women more visible in our research institution. More visibility will give you access to more opportunities, like you are able to compete better in the organization. And this gives us more, sort of more credibility as a scientist and more confidence to even pursue them further. So this will trickle down to the farmer, that you have more confident women researchers to go out and carry out this information. And these women researchers are able to relate much better to the women farmers. So this link, if you have a bigger group of these women, it will definitely trickle down to the women farmers and and improve the smallholder farmers especially. And as for the South-to-South collaboration, I think one of the major difference that I was able to notice working at Embrapa is how well that they were able to relate to some of the situations that are in Africa. That it might be like about 50 years back, talking to some of the scientists in Embrapa, that just about 50 years back, but it's not 200 years, and they are able to remember these things, able to remember what were some of the things that worked. And one of the main things that I took from it was the solutions needed to be homegrown, like empower more of the national research institutes to do more cutting-edge research. I think in some of the African countries, we have more of the international organizations doing much of the research as compared to the national research institutes. So I think this is what I've learned from some South-to-South partnerships.
Thank you very much. Now, Prabhu, I have no intention of putting any pressure on you as a representative of the Gates Foundation. You just heard something about the benefits of award. I think what struck me in the conference we organized in Delhi was that at a very short notice, we were able to get at least 10 or 12 international organizations to co-sponsor the effort. And Raj, who was the go-getter, who played a significant role in that, and Dr. Ayappan, who is here, they all were very active in making sure that we conveyed to the donors the fact that here is an opportunity to translate many of their concerns that they've been expressing about the importance of gender, etc. And the list of that will be in my PowerPoint presentation that will be on the web. And obviously, the Gates Foundation also played an instrumental role in our making that New Delhi conference a success. What I want to ask you are three questions. One is, it's not enough for just women to champion their cause. And I think the New Delhi effort and the GFAR effort was an example of the fact that it's only when men who are in positions of power take up that cause, not just women, it makes a huge leveraging difference. So I'd like to hear from you as a man what you think we can say to this audience of how men who are in this audience and beyond can help to leverage this. That's one question. The second is, what can we do to make sure that it's not just the Gates Foundation, but donors in general can play a role in making sure that the gender dimensions of all the work that they are doing become much more visible, which seems to be one of the important messages that comes out of the New Delhi conference. And in your huge amount of support that you are lending for very good data improvement in FAO, etc. I mean, there are many different ways that we can be creative in addition to having some support for establishing a network of networks. So your thoughts, not necessarily your commitment on funding, would be very welcome. And I think that would be, I'm going to give Prabhu the last word, and then we'll end our session. So thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I think you've raised a lot of really important issues. First, on network of networks. Noted. Noted. It's something that's something we'd like to continue talking about. When you go to donor school, they tell you how to respond without committing. So I'm responding without committing on that.
I am used to that answer. So
let me give you a few ideas of things that I think we should be doing. I think the CGIAR with the CRP processes that are in place, the gender work in the CRPs is moving forward. But I think there's a need for a cross-cutting level of attention to gender across the CGIARs. And I think at the consortium level, you need strong support for that. And I think you also probably need some kind of a competitive fund that the CRPs can access to be able to strengthen their work on gender across them. And I think that's something worth having a big discussion around across all the CGIAR donors, etc. I think the idea of award and expanding award into other areas like South Asia is a really important and exciting thing to think about. And certainly the Gates Foundation is only one player. There are many other players that need to come into the story. South Asia is one area where there's a critical need for an award type program and to empower women scientists in South Asia. Really crucial. I take your point about getting men involved. I've been quite actively involved in gender issues and bringing a gender perspective in all of the interactions I've been having with the development community, and I've been blogging a lot about this. And it makes a difference. It makes a difference because, it shows that it's not just women talking about women's issue, but we're talking about gender as the only rational way to address poverty and hunger. Because if you don't address women in agriculture, you're not going to see that productivity increase taking place. And I think that's the angle from which we come. Let me make one final comment here. In the end, transformative change has to take place at the national level and at the local level.
Agree.
It's not going to take place at the international level. But as a private foundation, we find that a large majority of our grant making goes to international organizations. CGIAR, UN agencies, international NGOs, etc. And very little of our grant making actually goes to national organizations. And there's a lot of reasons for that, including the fact that the capacity at the national level to be able to take large grants, to be able to effectively use grants, to effectively implement programs is limited. And so even though there's a spirit of saying we should go national, our ability to do that has been limited. So I think, and since I'm sitting here in a GCARD plenary, and with the GCARD establishment here and the GFAR head here, I'd like to pose this as the challenge to you, that GFAR should take on this challenge of building up national systems to a level where they can be competitive in taking grants from agencies such as ours. And unless you get to that point, we won't see transformative change taking place. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the panel for a very good job. And we are on time. We are on time. Thank you.